KLTV soundcheck. KLTV soundcheck.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday meeting of the BOCC. You want to join me? We'll do the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Since we were off yesterday for Memorial Day, I thought I found this video from 1983. It's a Ronald Reagan speech on Memorial Day, and he says it much better than I do. So if you want to bear with us for 5 minutes, we'll watch this.
In America's cities and towns today, flags will be placed on graves and cemeteries. Public officials will speak of the sacrifice and the valor of those whose memory we honor. I have no illusions about what little I can add now to the silent testimony of those who gave their lives willingly for their country. Words are even more feeble on this Memorial Day, for the sight before us is that of a strong and good nation that stands in silence and remembers those who were loved and who in return loved their countrymen enough to die for them. Yet we must try to honor them, not for their sakes alone, but for our own. And if words cannot repay the debt we owe these men, surely with our actions we must strive to keep faith with them and with a vision that led them to battle and a final sacrifice. Our first obligation to them and ourselves is plain enough. The United States and the freedom for which it stands, the freedom for which they died, must endure and prosper. Their lives remind us that freedom is not bought cheaply. It has a cost. It imposes a burden. And just as they whom we commemorate were willing to sacrifice, so too must we, in a less final, less heroic way, be willing to give of ourselves. Each died for a cause he considered more important than his own life. Well, they didn't volunteer to die. They volunteered to defend values for which men have always been willing to die if need be. The values which make up what we call civilization. And how they must have wished, in all the ugliness that war brings, that no other generation of young men to follow would have to undergo that same experience. As we honor their memory today, let us pledge that their lives, their sacrifices, their valor shall be justified and remembered for as long as God gives life to this nation. And let us also pledge to do our utmost to carry out what must have been their wish, that no other generation of young men will ever have to share their experiences and repeat their sacrifice. Earlier today, with the music that we have heard, and that of our national anthem, I can't claim to know the words of all the national anthems in the world, but I don't know of any other that ends with a question and a challenge as ours does. Does that flag still wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? That is what we must do. Thank you.
Thank you for letting us do that. He says it much more eloquently than I could ever express it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great way to start the week.
Okay. Commissioner Mortensen, if you'd give us a review of the minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you here, and I'm glad to have heard that again. I move to approve the minutes of the activities of the last, well, May 20th through the 22nd.
Okay. We have a motion to approve on the minutes. Questions, corrections? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I'll run down consent agenda pretty short today. Under agreements, we have a completion letter to Midway Underground for the Cowlitz Road Slide Repair Project. Total cost of that project was $390,419.02. And we have a resolution in a matter of setting a public hearing for July 30th, 2024 at 9:30 to identify project that may be eligible for Title III funding. These are federal forest payments. We get, last year, I think we got about 18,000. We're expecting a little bit about around that. They typically, the fire departments are who put in project bids for them. So we'll see that. And we're going through the process to do that. And miscellaneous isn't part of consent agenda, is it?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve today's consent agenda as presented.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Any questions, comments?
I did want to point out that the Cowlitz Road Slide Repair Project restores an alternative route for Ocean Beach Highway. There was some slide problems that made that a particularly precarious alternate route when a bigger slide shuts down Highway 4. So it's important to get that one rebuilt. And the federal funding that we're talking about is a program that counties have been advocating for years to try to recognize that there are services that have to be provided by county governments on federal lands for which we get no property tax. And this is a little tiny contribution in lieu of not paying property taxes from the federal government. And typically they go to projects that either help educate the public on protecting themselves from wildfires. There's construction and how landscaping strategies and techniques that they can use, or they assist in search and rescue operations on federal lands that often go through the rural fire departments. So both of these continue important programs by the county.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we have one miscellaneous item. I got to tease my colleague because you see he's dressed up. It's not a parole hearing. I just be upfront about that. It's not a parole hearing. He's got. I think you're meeting with government people today. Yeah.
Folks from Washington, D.C.
Yeah. One miscellaneous item. I don't know if this was consideration approval of preliminary grant and terms required to secure additional security funding through the Washington Administrative Office of the Courts. This is I think most of you know, we've talked about it. We're doing some security upgrades over at the Hall of Justice with cameras and different things. And Judge Basher secured a grant for that initially. And I think this is just an additional grant. Maybe I can have you just clarify that for us.
Thank you, Commissioners. Me on here, terrific. Thank you, Commissioners. Yes, this is essentially the same grant program that we accessed last year. I think we had 118 or 119,000 last year. We're making a request this year for 41,000, which it represents 60% of the total amount that we're proposing of 69,600. The way these grants work is the county has a 40% match when we do this. We wanted to give you guys a heads up that we've got some additional security that we couldn't fund under the current project we're doing. If you go to page 6 of the materials we submitted, that kind of lists out some of the details of what we're looking for. And what we really wanted to do at this point was to give you guys a heads up that if we do this, we'll be back this fall requesting an amendment for 2025. We're not asking for approval of this other than you want to give you heads up that we're looking at that. So, and make sure we
just want to make sure it got on the record.
Yep.
Perfect.
Give you a heads up on it. Make sure you don't have any opposition to us pursuing that.
I don't believe there is. There's a lot of security issues we need to address over there, and any help we can get.
Sounds good. And actually, these heads ups are appreciated, of course.
Okay. Any questions, or if not, we'll proceed ahead. This is kind of short notice as we have to have this submitted by the 31st, this Friday. So we wanted to make sure we at least we're over here to get a thumbs up or down before we proceeded. So that's all.
Yeah.
So
Where's your thumb? You want the thumbs up?
That's 2.
Yes.
All right.
Your Honor,
Okay.
we've been working on a lot of upgrades over at the Hall of Justice in a lot of different facilities. One additional ongoing discussion that we've had with the Superior Court has been some changes at the Cowlitz Youth Services Center. This doesn't have anything to do with that.
No.
More information to come on recommendations coming down the road for.
Separate issue there. This is purely, and it's listed out what we're proposing for upgrades. These are additional cameras, some secured doors, some security for the sheriff's evidence room. I believe that's what a piece of it is. So it's just things we couldn't fund in the current grant.
Great.
So
Thank you.
So if you have no questions, we'll get out of your hair.
Thank you,
All right.
Judge.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Your Honor, under this miscellaneous section, I wanted to bring up an item for discussion that was kind of a follow-up or a consequence of the Board of Health meeting last month, in which it turns out that we were, as you put it, put in timeout by YouTube, which we depend upon for live coverage of our proceedings. And they canceled us because of content during the discussion that day. We heard a very eloquent talk from former President Reagan about the values of democracy. And one value that what I feel was tremendously violated is this concept of free speech and the marketplace of ideas. Although every once in a while we'll have rowdy crowds here that kind of express displeasure at people who have differing viewpoints, to have a major corporation decide what is fit to go out to the public on a public discussion is absolutely un-American. And I would like to propose that we reprimand YouTube and demand an apology to Cowlitz County for interfering with the free exchange of ideas. And if they don't, we cancel them. We didn't always have YouTube, so I don't feel obligated to be a part of such an autocratic and anti-American activity as YouTube's censorship of government public discussions. That was wrong.
You realize you're going to get us put in timeout again.
Then we don't need them.
I'm teasing.
Then we don't
I'm
need 'em.
teasing. I totally agree with you. I don't have any problem with that. I think we are looking at options besides YouTube, because yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There's no room for that type of stuff when you got an open forum and you're having a discussion. Makes no sense.
Yeah.
Couple of updates that we have Board of Health at 10, a couple updates, then I'll open it up to the floor. Last week, I spoke, we had some time and we talked about the meeting I was at with Legislative Steering Committee for, I hate using acronyms, Washington State Association of Counties, not credit unions, counties. And they talked about a committee that, in the way it was put to me, that basically reports to the governor, a committee called EFSEC, EFSEC. And how some of the rural counties are having problems because they come in with, I gave the example of Spokane County. They were, EFSEC recommended or approved a wind farm over there without, they don't have to follow county guidelines. They don't have to, they can spin the rules if it's green energy and put these things in. And so there's been, Yakima expressed some concern, Spokane, other places on the east, is that they don't have to abide by county code or even work with the county if they don't want to. And I got an email that said, this is that basically said FSEC's been around since it was formed by the legislature in 1970. And they do have to talk to the counties. It told me they're not tyrannical. I don't think I called them that. I think I probably intimated that they were. But all I can report to you is what the counties are telling me how they operate. And a lot of things start, as most things, it starts with good intentions. In the 70s, Department of Energy started because we're too dependent on foreign oil. Well, now it's 2024 and we're in the same spot. Department of Education was formed in the 70s to keep us at the top of the rank in education. And you've all seen how that's done. So these things can start with good intentions, but over time they morph into something that they were never intended to be. So I think that's the point on this FSEC is the counties are feeling like it's more into something it was never intended to be and has more power. So Justin,
So
since I learned
what's
more.
that acronym stand for?
Yeah, I don't know. FSEC, I didn't, it's environmental something.
And actually, Energy Facility Siting Committee or
Yeah.
Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have the power to just to, according to I've never dealt with them. I don't think we've ever dealt with them personally. I don't think we've had that something come into our county, but I can tell you some Eastern Washington counties and citizens are not happy because they're putting these things in their backyard with no input.
Yeah,
And-
originally it was to monitor the siting of nuclear power plants in Washington.
Yeah.
And then it morphed into other.
So you can see how things
Yeah.
morph. That's one of the reasons I'm very hesitant on any new government program.
So, excuse me. It's early morning, I guess, somewhere in Hawaii, maybe. What I want to bring up is that I often take opportunity to point out to the public how some of the government games are actually played. A classic example was when the WIRA 25 and 26 met in 2010 or 12 in response to the 2006 proposal that, or the Department of Ecology, which hamstrung the county. Part of those discussions were a desire to put meters on private exempt wells. And one of the arguments that was put forth at the time was, don't worry your pretty little head about this, because you see, we don't have the manpower to enforce that. So don't worry about it. We'll pass it and then we'll worry about it in the future. And this is an example. This FSEC has been here since
1970.
70, and all of a sudden it starts to arise now. The public should really be aware that you should not allow any regulations that do not have a thoughtful understanding of the implications today and for tomorrow, because this is a game that's played. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
The whole idea that state agencies don't have to follow or recognize local land use issues also came about when, with the legalization of marijuana, and the state issues licenses to people to have production facilities and marketing facilities and retail facilities. And people assumed, because they got the state license, that they can build anywhere. And it has been a headache because they don't follow the rules that all the other businessmen have to follow. And they get by with cheaper construction, and they ignore an awful lot of the rules and regulations that are designed at the local level to protect people. And again, it came from the state, and they say it's not our job to enforce that, and they won't even they won't turn somebody down because they're violating local land use ordinances, and that's just wrong. It's backwards.
I agree with that. In a sort of semi follow-up, those businesses are victimized, if you will, by the banks. They typically have not allowed credit cards to be used and various things of that nature, and it smacks of a little too much interference in my book. So it's not a balanced approach on either side.
Yeah. One other update from my end, I had a call from Daily News last week. I think they did an article on opioid settlements, and I got email, so I thought I'd just bring everybody up to date on the newest stuff on that. Just a little history. We have a settlement from whatever the first one is, Johnson & Johnson, that pays out over a period of years, 15, 17 years. Over that period of years, Cowlitz County will receive $3,501,467 and some cents. To date, we've received $729,617.78 of that settlement, and we get something every year. In addition, there was another settlement that looks like it's going to be paid out and it's a lump sum settlement of 61.67 million available in a one-time payment. And we signed a deal, and we'll be receiving payment on that. And I don't know what that one lump sum is going to be. It's probably along the same percentage as the other, but I don't know that for a fact. And then additionally, there's a new opioid settlement with Kroger that I'm sure our finance person will fill out the paperwork for that. And I don't know what the Kroger settlement, the projected amount for Washington is 47.5 million, payable over 11 years. So we'll see what that amounts to. So we have some of these coming in, and the question from, I think, the Daily News is, have we started using some of those? And I think, I don't know the answer to that. I think Human and Health Services is still looking at, because it's like 7 pages of what you can use it for, and still kind of getting their hands around that thing. But that's just a little update, because I know an article came out, and then we received an email from state of Washington that there's another one, Kroger, that'll be coming too. So other than that, I'm out next week, so you're stuck with my colleagues. I'm gonna be in Idaho playing. And with that, unless you have anything else.
Are you sure you don't wish to zoom in?
You know, I don't know that I get Zoom where I'm at.
On the motorcycle.
That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Okay, we have some time. We have Board of Health that starts at 10. I think we have a presentation on that today, but if you have comments or something, we're open.
Good morning, Dennis. It's nice to see you all dressed up.
That's as shocking as if I all of a sudden showed up in a suit. So,
No, that would really. be
yeah,
shocking.
yeah. Well, I'm down. I only have pajamas and these clothes now, so you get that choice. Rick, I want to compliment you on that Reagan video this morning. That was very appropriate. And the good news is all of us in this audience are old enough to understand what we looked at. My challenge to you would be to get that into all the schools where the people have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
That was some pretty interesting footage from World War I, because movies weren't all that common back in those days.
Anything else? Okay. We will adjourn this meeting. Remember, Board of Health will fire up at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, welcome to the Cowlitz County Board of Health meeting. We'll call this meeting to order at 10 o'clock. Thank you for coming. In order to be respectful of the public time and to keep our time within our time frame, I ask everybody, please hold your questions till the public comment period at the end of the meeting, towards the end. I think, is Mary Jane online? Okay. Mary Jane Link is going to Zoom in with us. I don't see her on the screen, but she's there. So first order of old business would be to review the minutes. Everybody received the minutes, and I'd entertain a motion to accept them. Somebody would like to?
I make a motion to accept the minutes of our last board meeting.
Okay, motion on the floor to accept the meeting minutes of May 7th. Any discussion? Let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 And I say aye. Any opposed? I don't think so. So unanimous pass. Gina, you want just for a couple minutes. At the last meeting, there was a motion made to kind of flesh out the priority list of on the budgets. Gina and HHS are working on that. And just, if you just tell us a little brief, quick thing, what's going on with that. And but we're expecting that for the next meeting, next month.
Yep. So we are working on this, Gina James, Health and Human Services. We're working on, we had presented to the Board of Health sort of a priority list around different areas we felt were important to address. And we're certainly open to additional ideas on that. So from the last meeting, we were asked to prepare sort of an expanded version of that includes a budget. We're also looking at potential process and timelines connected to those things, as well as impact. So we're working on kind of fleshing that out and are diving into that now, and we'll have that ready, bring back for you in June.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the little update.
Yep.
And then last one, Alyssa, is there any progress on the meeting with the tribal elders?
Not yet. I'm still waiting for a response from leadership. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, we'd like to follow up on that later. Okay, we're getting into the new business, and the first item on the agenda, we have Dr. Krager, our health officer, and you must be Shannon, our epidemiologist, is that correct? And they are going to give us a presentation on overdose deaths in our county. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your work on this. And we'll turn it over to you guys.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now? Oh my gosh, that's loud. Hi. All right, I think we have some slides.
Okay.
So Shannon, you may need to bring that microphone a little bit closer because every time you turn your head slightly, it's hard to hear. So it's kind of real directional. So, feel comfortable, bring it a little bit closer.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, we're good. All right, great. Thanks so much for having us today. Like Kelly said, I am Shannon Hoskins. I'm the contracted epidemiologist with Cowlitz County Health and Human Services. I've actually never been here in person to present before, so it's exciting to be in this chair. I have with me Dr. Steve Krager, our esteemed health officer. I think that's how you guys like to, that's how we like to describe him too. All right, we're gonna dive on in. So I have a remote. I believe it works. Let's see. I swear it worked like an hour and a half ago. All right, well, do you mind advancing them? You can just hit the right arrow, I think. There you go. Okay. All right, so what are we here to accomplish today? Great. So I'm going to be talking about data, of course, as the epidemiologist. We'll be talking about trends and patterns in drug overdose data, as well as how today's data align with and differ from the data that the Cowlitz County coroner has presented in the past. And then click. Thanks. And then Dr. Krager is going to be talking about fentanyl. All right, so before we get into the actual data, I want to go over some terms so everybody's really familiar with what I mean when I use different words. So when we talk about drug overdose deaths, which is the main data that we're going to be talking about today, drugs include all types of drugs, including those that are prescribed legally as well as those that are illegal. So when I use the term psychostimulants, that primarily we're talking about methamphetamine, but technically it includes any stimulant that has the potential for addiction. And then click. Then cocaine just includes cocaine. That one's pretty straightforward. Then we have opioids is our big category. And then let's just click through. Let's bring all of them up at once. That one, yep. Another one, yep. And then one, and then two more. Great. Oh, and then two more after that. Perfect. Thanks. Okay. So opioids is the term that we're going to use when we're talking about any opioid or opiate type drug. However, there is a little bit of a difference. So opiates are things that are from natural chemical compounds, and you can see there that that includes heroin. Opioids are technically substances that are made in the lab. They might be made from natural substances or they might be completely synthetic. Fentanyl is the one that we hear most often about synthetic opioids. And then prescription opioids are ones that are prescribed. Those are the ones that are involved in the opioid settlement funding you guys were talking about earlier today. Morphine and codeine are natural ones. Hydrocodone, oxycodone, and methadone are examples of synthetic opioids. So let's go to our next slide. Okay, now I'm going to talk about what I mean when I talk about a drug overdose death and an opioid overdose death. So a drug overdose death, click please. That is where the primary underlying cause of death was a drug overdose. I want you guys to keep in mind that when you see the numbers on the different types of drugs that contribute to drug overdoses, they're going to add up to more than 100%. The reason for that is because we often have more than one drug listed as a contributing factor. So if those don't add up to 100%, that's why. And then the vast majority of drug overdose deaths are unintentional, but my data do include overdose deaths where the person committed suicide via a drug overdose. They can even sometimes include homicides that include a drug overdose or overdose deaths where the intent is unknown. Now we're going to go to opioid overdose deaths. And that's the next, you can click both of those, thank you. And those are where that primary cause of death is a drug overdose and an opioid is listed as a contributing factor. And I want to point out that my understanding is it can be challenging to figure out if there's multiple drugs that are present, it can be challenging to figure out which of those drugs contributed, how much they contributed. So it's a drug overdose death that has an opioid listed. Okay, and now we're going to go through the data sources of the data we're talking about today versus what the coroner has presented in the past. So the source of data that the coroner gets her data from is from the log that they keep with the death investigations that they do. The data that I'll be presenting today come from death certificates that are filed with the Washington State Department of Health. And click another. So the coroner has jurisdiction over deaths that occur in Cowlitz County. Our data include deaths among people who live in Cowlitz County. And I have a little Venn diagram down here that'll illustrate how those things overlap. So if we have a Cowlitz County resident who dies in Cowlitz County, those are going to show up in both of those data sets. However, if we get one more click, if we have somebody who lives outside of Cowlitz County and dies in Cowlitz County, those people are going to be in the coroner data, but not in mine. And then the flip side of that is if somebody from Cowlitz County goes outside the county, dies of a drug overdose, they eventually will end up back in my data, but they're not going to show up in the coroner data. So I want you guys to just understand the differences because I know a lot of times when numbers look like they should match and then they don't, and then there's questions, I just want you to be really clear on that. And then I have two more pieces at the bottom that talk about, I think each of these data sources have really valuable strengths that are kind of complementary. So the coroner data are really timely because she doesn't have to wait for death certificates to file or anything like that. They just have data at the ready in their shop. The data that I'm waiting for, people have to file the death certificates with the state. If the person dies like out of state, for example, it has to get sent to national data registries and then back to us. So there can be a time lag, but it accurately measures risk. Because when we're talking about risk, what we care about is what is the thing that we're concerned about out of the people that we're concerned about. And in this county, we're concerned with Cowlitz County residents. So, okay. All right, so a couple things I want you guys to keep in mind. So those are the differences in data. Now I want you guys to keep some things in mind when we're dealing with small numbers. Even though we have just over 110,000 people in the county, we do end up dealing with challenges around small numbers often in my work. And I want to be clear on how that can limit what we can do with the data that we have. So when we're working with small groups of people, we can be really limited when we're making conclusions from the data because counts can fluctuate due to random chance. And that has a much bigger impact when we're working with small numbers than big. And then I'm also limited in numbers that I can even report because we need to make sure that people in the community can't take the reports that I'm putting out and identify confidential health information about the people that are included in those reports. So we've got two pieces there that we have to keep in mind. This is an example that I was able to find. This is real Cowlitz County data, dying from anemia, not something you hear often about, but it kind of shows the point. So if you go back all the way to 2011, one person died from anemia in Cowlitz County in 2011, and that was 2 deaths in 2012. Now, these numbers are too small to make strong conclusions. We are not going to be making a big deal out of the fact that the deaths doubled. I mean, they did double, but it's based on 1 death. So I want to be really clear about that. And I can't provide any demographic information about those people to protect their privacy. Okay, so there's a couple of things that we can do to mitigate these issues. The first one is the types of language that we use. I use language like something may have happened or the data suggest. And when you see me using those terms, what that means is my findings are based on small numbers and I can't really tell if it's kind of a blip or if there's something concerning kind of underlying going on. And one thing that we can do in order to kind of get over our issues with our county is I can kind of backfill with state level data because the numbers are larger and then we can make stronger conclusions. So just like with the coroner versus our data, there's kind of pros and cons to either one. And I know that Commissioner Mortensen, you sometimes have questions about confidence intervals over graphs. I don't have any of those in my presentation today because I think often folks without a scientific background, those just kind of like clutter it up. But when you see that language like the suggest and may have, that means that those confidence intervals would have overlapped at some point. Okay, so now we're finally getting into the data. All right, so we're going to look at time trends for Cowlitz County, and we're going to compare ourselves to Washington. So in 2022, 38 Cowlitz County residents died of a drug overdose. And then next click, please. To put that into perspective, that's 1 out of every 3,000 residents in 2022. Next click, please. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at per capita drug overdose deaths, and this takes into account over time the fact that our population has gotten bigger and it's gotten older. So if we look at the individual years, this is what we see, all of these teeny dots. The good news is that I have some statistical analysis software that can take the data in these dots and let me know if there's any underlying trends. And so from 2000 to 2005, you'll see that the risk of dying from a drug overdose in Cowlitz County doubled from 13 people who died in 2000 to 28 in 2005. And you'll notice here that I'm not using any softening language. I'm saying it increased because we know that that's an actual trend. There is no question that that is not happening because of blips. That is an actual thing that it was happening in our county. From 2005 to 2019, we decreased about 30%. And then since then, another click, please. Thanks. Since then, we've again about doubled from 20 in 2019 to that 38 in 2022. Then if I can get another click, this gray line down here, when it comes up, thanks. That is the Washington State trend, just for some context. And you can see that the trend was sort of similar as far as when things were increasing and decreasing and staying the same, things like that. There was a somewhat similar trend in Washington State. And then the last piece on this slide is this. So this is where you'll see a little bit of softening language, because when I look at the per capita rates, we may be about 10% higher than the state, but I'm not sure if that's a real difference or if it's just kind of an artifact of small numbers. So anyway, okay, so we've got that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about more recent data. These are data that come from preliminary death certificate data that's not complete yet. And so when we look at 2023 numbers, so far, 49 residents of Cowlitz County have died from a drug overdose. That's about a 25% increase from 2022. So we saw it was going up since 2019. It still appeared to be going up in 2023. And I want to point out that, remember, because the death certificate data takes some time for the processing to happen, I would be very surprised if these numbers didn't increase once the data are final. I don't have a good sense for how much that's going to be, but I anticipate those increasing. Now, the coroner counts just happen to be exactly the same, but remember that Venn diagram that I showed you guys, these are not the same. Some of the people are the same, but it's not all the same people. This is 49 deaths that occurred in Cowlitz County in 2023. And then we even have more recent data, even just from the first quarter of this year, that I'm hoping is like telling a good story. So if you go through this one, we get another click, please. Thanks. So this is data coming from coroners across the state reporting what they're seeing in their shops. And this is much closer to real time than what we're seeing with death certificates. And you'll see that the 2022 to 2023 data are similar. We are seeing that increase, but the hopeful, and I mean, I'm hopeful with like 5 asterisks after it. I'm hoping that the fact that the first quarter of last year compared to the first quarter of this year, we've actually seen potentially a decrease of 1%. So I'm hoping that that means that we're leveling off, but I'm saying that like, if I can put all of the qualifiers in there, I will, because these are very early data and I don't know what it's going to look like down the road. Okay, now that we've gone through time trends, we're going to talk about age. So I know that there's a lot of concern with drug overdose deaths among kids and young people in Cowlitz County. So we're going to look at data by age. Now, the good news is if you look up at the top, the top of that little box, in Cowlitz County from 2000 to 2022, we do not have enough overdose deaths in our county among young people for me to even be able to report for the past few years, that's good news. A lot of times when data are suppressed, that's a good thing because we don't have enough to even tell you about. So that's a good thing. So I went all the way back to 2000, which is the earliest that I was able to get data out of the system that I have. There have been 0 children age 0 to 9 that have died from a drug overdose in the last 23 years. So that is very, very good news. Among teens and tweens, age 10 to 17, if we look at, if we think about if something happens once every other year, it doesn't even happen that frequently for those guys. I can't tell you how many, again, because of those privacy rules that I was talking about. I do have some state data I'm going to be able to provide in a little bit, but we have fewer than 1 drug overdose death among teens and tweens every other year. And then young adults in our county, there's about 1 or 2 drug overdose deaths in that age group each year. And then if we go over here, this per capita, I had that 2000 underlined because I want to focus on, this is just the last 3 years. There are a lot more drug overdoses among folks that are 25 and older. So if we look at those guys, those bars are those per capita rates, and that takes into account how many deaths versus the size of the population. That tells us the risk, how likely somebody is to die of a drug overdose. You can see that risk peaks in our county between 35 and 54 years old. Those guys are at highest risk of dying in a drug overdose in our county. And then I know that
Shannon, do you use the state's annual estimate of population for your base, or is it the census?
So we use this. So typically we would use the Office of Financial Management figures.
The April 1st figure then.
Yes, but those have not been available the last few years. So we actually right now are using these interim population estimates that came out of King County. I've used them in all of the reporting I've done the last few years. I think they're good enough to make decent conclusions off of. So yeah, I don't know if there's more information you wanted about that. But yeah, with the pandemic happened during the census, that really threw a wrench in a lot of population denominators. But these specific rates might change a little bit once we get final figures, but I think these rates are good enough to make some general conclusions off of. Those counts at the bottom, those are the number of deaths that we see. I included the counts in addition to the rates because I know you guys like those. So I wanted to give those guys to you, but those are counts. Those are not rates. Those are two different things. So, okay, so we went through that. Now we have just one quick slide on gender. I think it's, yep, one more click. There we go. Yep. So males are twice as likely to die from a drug overdose than females. This pattern has held over time. Now we're going to talk about drugs that are contributing to drug overdose deaths. So if we go through these, so this is statewide data because our county data are just not big enough to be able to make strong conclusions about. But since 2016, you can see that that gray line is all drug overdose deaths. You can see that opioid overdose deaths have increased about threefold since 2016 across the state. And then if we get to our next click, psychostimulants, just remember that's methamphetamine. Those contribute to about half of drug overdose deaths, and they've increased about 4 times since 2016. And then cocaine at the bottom has also increased 4 times. We can get that guy up. And then the next click will give us some Cowlitz County numbers. I think they're too small to make really strong conclusions off of. The only thing I want to point out that at the state, opioids play a factor in more overdose deaths than psychostimulants do. But in our county, it actually looks to be pretty on par for those 2022 figures. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then our next slide is going to talk about drugs contributing specifically to opioid deaths. And if we click through those guys, this is really similar to what we saw last time. It's just that gray is now those opioid deaths. So we click through those. So fentanyl contributes to about 90% of opioid overdose deaths across the state have fentanyl involved. Prescription opioids, which all of that has to do with like the opioid settlement money that we were talking about earlier today, those have actually decreased by about 30%. And then heroin across the state has decreased about 50%. And if you bring up the next piece, these are the Cowlitz County counts, and the fentanyl and prescription opioids look to be pretty similar. But I want to point out that the heroin might be a little bit different. I don't know really what to do with this. The numbers are really small. I don't know that heroin deaths have gone up in our county. They might have stayed the same. They haven't gone down, I can tell you that much, because I looked at additional years in addition to the 2016 to 22. So anyway, don't totally know what to make out of that. However, I will say that heroin contributes a lot less than fentanyl does. I can say that as much. So, okay. So we've got that. And then I have
one question for you on that. When I see these type of things, when I see those graphs, would it be correct to I don't always like making an assumption, but make an assumption that you're seeing differences due to supply and costs?
That's a great question. And my data can't tell you that, but yes, are people using fentanyl more? Is fentanyl becoming more available? Is it becoming more dangerous? Are people using it in dangerous ways? These are great questions that my data just can't answer. Dr. Krager might be able to chime in now or later.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's the general assumption is that yes, especially fentanyl, it is so widely available and generally inexpensive compared to other things. That is probably the biggest reason why this is happening. Again, it's hard to draw strong conclusions, but that's what generally people think.
Yeah, because I think there's others where, hey, I don't get the high off of this anymore, so I'm going to something stronger. And I'm assuming it's probably a supply and cost, and I don't know that it's the other.
That's a good question. Can I ask a question? I was wondering, it said first quarter 2024, there's a decrease in deaths. Now, do you think that could be because of the increase in Narcan availability? It's not less use, it's just that they're using the Narcan and pulling them out of the death position?
That's another great question. I can't answer that for sure. We don't know. And especially that more recent data, we don't have great kind of analysis on, I would say. In general, Narcan is slightly, more available. But it's tough to say. I think there's a certain point too where, I don't like seeing these, even I'm glad the numbers are flattening off, but they're still really high, right? We're just not seeing an increase as much. Maybe we've kind of hit the maximum of what we can, see just in terms of people dying. I'm not sure how to interpret that. I don't know if Narcan is a part of that or not. It's potentially, but it's hard to say for sure.
Is there a way that they could collect that data? Like if there's an ambulance, but they don't get transported, they could at least note that Narcan was used just to kind of have a better picture of how many are being saved from that?
Yeah, so we theoretically have data from our EMS services when they go out, and there's actually a whole surveillance program that looks at responding to opioid overdoses. The problem is that Narcan is not documented consistently. So I theoretically have access to those data, but I've not really done much with it because I just don't know if it's kind of good enough to make conclusions off of. We can look into it and present it, but I don't know. That's been a big unclear piece for me, but I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, so there is some tracking of when EMS gives Narcan, but again, it's not always documented appropriately. But yeah, anyone using it outside of that system, who's gotten it, we don't have a good way to track that.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. And I'm going to try to skim through these quickly. This slide, it really doesn't tell us anything different from what we saw from the previous slides as far as the types of drugs that are contributing to overdoses. The point of the slide is just to say that in 2023, these same trends are continuing. Opioids, fentanyl, psychostimulants contributing a lot, cocaine, prescription heroin not contributing as much. And then this other graph that I put together is actually based on that report that the coroner presented a while back. And most of those deaths have fentanyl and or methamphetamine that are contributing. Cocaine and heroin is just not as much. So these last couple of slides that I have, they have no graphs. So if you're not a graph person, then you can be happy about that. But what I tried to do is put together the information, kind of tried to summarize it and package it in ways that that can answer the questions that I know that you guys have and also can be useful. So I know that folks are really wondering how drug overdose are affecting youth. I provided some Cowlitz County data, but we just don't have a lot. So I backfilled this with some state data. So the good news with children age 0 to 9 is these are very rare. They do happen, but they're very rare. And they are much lower down kind of on the list of when you look at what are the biggest contributors to children's mortality. Drug overdoses fall down between like the 8th and 9th. And so they are not, the data show that they do not impact children's mortality as much as other things. For tweens and teens, it's a little bit of a different story. Those have actually gone up. Drug overdose deaths, the risk of dying from drug overdose statewide has gone up about 10 times since 2012. Again, I put those numbers in there because I know that you guys like to see those with those big increases. It used to be about 5 a year. Now it was 38 in 2021. And then drug overdoses are currently between the 2nd and 3rd leading cause of death in this age group. The good news is that those guys are about 80 to 90% less likely to die from an overdose than the state average. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag there, I think. And young adults, I would say the same thing. We've seen an increase since 2016, ranks pretty high on the cause of death, maybe about 10% lower, but I wouldn't make too big of a deal out of that. So this slide I'm hoping can kind of give you guys some information about okay, what is the overall status of drug overdoses with youth, and then how do we want to use that? And my last slide talks about how might we want to target our drug overdose death prevention work. And so 2 questions I think are helpful to answer are who's at highest risk from dying of a drug overdose. In our county, that's kind of these middle-aged males. And then in Cowlitz County, remember I said that psychostimulants contribute less to overdose deaths statewide, but here it's about 2/3 of overdose deaths involve a psychostimulant, mainly meth, and about 2/3 include opioids. about 40% of drug overdoses overall include fentanyl. That isn't out of the opioids, it's out of all of them. So that's all I have, and then I'm happy to turn it on over.
One question, just to go back, can you go back
Yeah.
to the last
for it.
previous slide?
Yeah.
I think let me see it again. So just in the youth, I think, well, what I thought I heard is that what's the overall drug overdose death? I mean, we have a list from HHS that was saying the top 4 reasons for death. So where does drug overdose come in?
Yeah, so when we're looking at the county total, I believe it's between, I actually think I have that here.
I thought you said second or third.
So that's for younger people. So I believe that for the county as a whole, it's between the 8th and 9th.
Okay.
But remember, most people who die are older, and drug overdoses really, if you remember that age graph, the risk of drug overdoses goes down after you're kind of middle-aged, and then it's kind of, cancer and heart disease, the diseases that were on that page, those are the ones that contribute most heavily because they're the ones that old people tend to die of. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I love questions, so.
So the strategies need to be addressing middle-aged males.
That's what the data would support.
And what works?
That's where I turn it over.
It's a great question. So yeah, thank you, Shannon, for all that data. I have a couple slides. Oh,
you know what? Oh, we do have some slides. Dr. Krieger has some slides. I do actually have a resources slide right after this that I forgot about.
I got like 2 more slides and
There we
we're
go.
almost done. Where did mine go? Oh, it was mine after this?
Yeah, they keep
Okay,
going.
cool.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah. So a couple things regarding your question, Commissioner Weber. I think it's a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion, first of all. Although I do think it's a really important thing to talk about, especially as we go forward in terms of making priorities, as a health department. I will say we have some evidence-based strategies to address some of these things, but not a lot of great data about recent strategies regarding fentanyl. I'm just going to be kind of straightforward. So it's a struggle. People are trying a lot of different things. There's harm reduction strategies, there's prevention strategies. Personally, I always try to go to kind of the root cause of things. So I see a lot of benefit in trying to prevent people from using drugs in the first place. So what is driving people to do that? I do like the idea of, talking to youth and providing some education. One of the other things that we see, as a risk factor for drug use is adverse childhood experiences and trauma. Some of those things can, if we can prevent some of those things from happening to kids and young people, we can potentially prevent mental health issues down the road. And all of those things might, potentially prevent drug use as people age. But it's a really complicated question. Yeah.
Well, my question is a little bit selfish. I'm not running for re-election, but 6 people have filed, and 4 of them are in that are going to be in that middle-aged category.
Yeah,
and that's going to be a challenge for the next commission.
Absolutely.
I think your seats average age is going to be much less too. So it's going to be very appropriate for the next commission. Again, the answers are very complex, and you get into the social determinants of health and
right.
Try to do what you can. If my colleague, Mr. Mortensen, reminds us all the time that from a government perspective, we've been at war against drugs for well over 50 years. It's not getting any better.
Mm-hmm.
So government programs may not be the answer, but we're still trying to figure it out.
Yep. I did want, so a couple of months ago at our last Board of Health meeting, we had some good discussion around fentanyl in general, as well as naloxone. So I just had a couple slides just to provide a brief overview from like a physician's perspective about what fentanyl is and what it isn't. So just a couple things I wanted to touch on. As Shannon mentioned, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, so we make it in a lab, doesn't occur naturally like something like opium. It's 20 to 40 times more potent than heroin, 100 times more potent than morphine. However, I like to point out that the dose makes the poison, right? So how much you give someone is really what's important. So just going from that, if we were using this in a healthcare setting, which it does happen, right? Fentanyl is used for pain control as well as, anesthesia. You might get a dose of like 0.04 milligrams or 0.05 milligrams, and that would be similar to 5 milligrams of morphine. So it's been used in healthcare for a long time. As I mentioned, it's often used as a part of anesthesia. People with chronic pain or like really severe cancer pain are often provided fentanyl. We've used it for a long time. I think the problem that we're seeing now, right, is not necessarily this prescribed fentanyl in healthcare settings. It's all this illicit fentanyl that is so easily available. The problem is that it can be produced in a lab, right? And it apparently can be produced fairly easily in large quantities. And that is leading to large quantities, in our communities. So I do want to point out that there really is no safe way to use fentanyl that's obtained outside of a healthcare setting. Illicit fentanyl, it's often in a powder form. Sometimes that's pressed into a pill. If you think about just little tiny like grains of salt or something like that, pushing that into a pill, you might not get the same dose on one half of a pill compared to the other. So we've heard, anecdotal stories of people saying, I only took a half a pill, and my other friend took the other half and they overdosed and I didn't. We had the same tolerance. Why is that? Also in general, in the powder form, there's going to be other substances potentially mixed in, and you just don't have no way to know the actual strength of that powder, right? How much fentanyl is actually present. The other thing that we've been trying to tease out, and we actually had some conversation with the coroner about this, is like, are people using, we're seeing a lot of, poly drug overdoses, right? So multiple drugs present, methamphetamine, cocaine, fentanyl. Are these on purpose, or is it someone trying to use another drug and then having fentanyl cut into that for various reasons? It's really hard to tease that out, but I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I think sometimes people are trying to use multiple drugs and sometimes maybe not. One, just as a safety thing, I just wanted to point out, we're very confident that fentanyl is not easily absorbed through the skin, at least the powder or pill form that we're talking about. While obviously I want everyone to take precautions around fentanyl and not touch it, it is not easily absorbed. If you get some on your skin, it's okay to just wash your skin off, and there's literally no chance of overdose in that fashion. One other quick thing, we've talked a lot about people who use drugs. There's some really good data from the University of Washington about why people use drugs. And there's a lot of different reasons why people say this. And I just want to point out that it's quite complicated. So people often report using it for chronic pain, right? So sometimes it's someone who was prescribed opioids from a physician. As we've learned more about that use as pain relief and how it's not always the best option for people. A lot of, physicians and providers have moved away from that. And then people potentially have, gone to other sources, right? More illicit sources. People sometimes self-medicate, right? People do that with alcohol. They also use it with drugs. And so sometimes they're treating some, either diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health disorder. Let's go to the next slide. I'm almost done, I swear. Oh yeah. So I wanted to talk just about like physically what happens, when someone has an overdose. We can just go through the next couple like points. So this can happen obviously if you take too much, if you mix it with other substances, or a change in tolerance. So one of the other things we hear about sometimes is, someone went to jail, they didn't have any access to opioids in jail. What's called their tolerance, so how much their body is used to opioids changes. They then obtain, their usual dose and then overdose because their body is not used to that anymore. So the primary risk what we're talking about, and I think this is pretty common sense, but I just want to talk through it. It stops your body from breathing. I mean, that's the biggest risk, right? Other things are going on as well. And I talk about some of the symptoms, slow, shallow, erratic breathing, change in color, blue or purple lips, your pupils may be pinpoint, someone may be choking, pale, cold, clammy skin, limp body, or someone who's unconscious. Those are all, signs and symptoms of overdose. And then what we try to educate about what to do if someone is having these symptoms, right? So if naloxone, which is also called Narcan, which is the brand name, administering that if available, trying to keep a person awake, lie the person on their side in case they start throwing up. And then, if someone's stopped breathing or breathing very slowly, you can begin CPR. Let's go to the next slide. I just want to talk about naloxone real quick, and then we'll have more time for questions. So naloxone reverses the effects of opioids in the body. It basically blocks the receptors in your body. There's nasal and injectable forms available as well as IV. Most what we're see in the community is this nasal form because it's the easiest to administer. Most people don't like to give an injection or know how to give an injection. I want to say, obviously, there's some crossover between an overdose and potentially having some other medical event, right? But it's safe to give people who are not in an overdose. So if you have any sort of inkling that maybe an overdose is happening, you can, but you're not sure, you can give naloxone. It's not going to hurt a person. And sometimes it may need to be given multiple times. It is available over the counter at pharmacies. You do have to pay for it now. You can get it with a prescription. There's kind of places around the state that provide naloxone, often for free, including via the mail. So I do want to encourage people, if to have naloxone on hand. I think of it as giving people a chance. As a physician, I think of these things as how we would treat kind of anyone with a medical condition. So I wouldn't deny someone with emphysema, who is currently still smoking. I wouldn't deny them treatment for their emphysema. I want to give people, a chance to overcome, their addictions, overcome their use of drugs. So I think naloxone, well, one piece of our, response to trying to prevent overdose deaths, I do think it's an important one. Okay, I think that's the end, and we have more time for questions, hopefully.
Thank you very much. Lots of good information there. Just one question for you, Doctor. How does the naloxone work? Is it attacking the drug in the body?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have essentially what are called opioid receptors on the outside of our cells, and they're little spots where the drugs can attach. And then they end up causing those effects that we've talked about. Naloxone binds to those, so it's like a puzzle piece, right? Fitting into that receptor. Naloxone binds to those, but it doesn't cause the effects. So it basically blocks the opioids from entering those receptors and then stays there, but it doesn't cause the bad effects that we see. Does that make sense? Okay.
Is that binding more powerful with Narcan than the drug?
Yes, it's more
pushes
powerful.
The drug out of the way to get.
Yeah,
connection.
exactly. It is a stronger kind of affinity. The downside is that sometimes there's opioids that last in the body longer than Narcan can. So that has happened in the past. It happened more often with heroin. or longer acting opioids. Fentanyl is shorter acting, so it doesn't seem to happen as much, but we're still very careful. If someone ends up, in an ER, they often want to leave, right? But sometimes people will go back into an overdose state. The Narcan leaves their body, but the opioids are still there. So we counsel people, to stick around in the ER for a few hours, so that we make sure that doesn't happen.
Commissioner Martin.
So I have a bunch of notes and I'm not sure I can tie them together cleanly. I would play off of what my colleague said, that I do remind people we've been fighting the war on drugs for 50 or more years. And therein lies an interesting issue of why is it that we don't have success? We look at the data and again, it's been nicely done, so I appreciate that. But I don't know what to do with the data for a couple of reasons, but primarily, we don't seem to understand the problem. If you look at the Bible, it says, don't touch that apple on the tree, and yet we go ahead and touch that apple on the tree. And we seem not to understand that. All this data is interesting. I mean, I find it academically interesting, but I don't find it very useful from a policy decision because every policy possible has been tried. Now, the most useful thing maybe not in the United States, like in Iran or in the Philippines, you were caught with a drug and you were dispatched on the spot. I don't think we're prepared really to do that. So within what we're prepared to do, I don't see a solution. We also are concentrating on something in sort of a narrow way, and I think you'll all think I'm a bit strange when I take you through this scenario. We've got a group of people that are the drug task force. And of course, they are out there interested in taking down the folks that deal with drugs in a big way, the cartelish kind of stuff. And when that drug task force puts a guy out, there is a decrease of availability of drugs in the street. And the consequence of that is that someone who really wants a drug now doesn't stop at a single criminal act of hitting someone over the head or snatching their purse or breaking and entering. They have to do it again twice because the price has gone up. So you end up philosophically having to ask yourself, who are we helping by taking this approach that for 50 years hasn't been successful? Another thing I would do is, I'm not sure that the Cowlitz County data itself has any real meaning because the numbers are so small. And I think statistically we could expect all kinds of strange things, and we probably have seen strange things. What I would advocate for more is we look at the state data more carefully, and rather than the county trying to solve the drug problem, the county folks in conjunction with the state level folks actually trying to figure out, is there something they've overlooked? All that aside, I want to thank the doctor for the last few slides because treatment advice is really quite useful. People are going to do what they're going to do, and you're saying, if you catch yourself or a friend in this condition, here's how you should handle it. I think we need to make that more available. I know it'll offend some people because they think it's trying to encourage someone to misbehave, but you're either going to do drugs or you're not. And if you have a child and you walk in on them, something like that, you'd be happy with yourself if you could help them. And so overall, am I correct in thinking that we really are repeating today what we might have heard 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and so forth? And drugs are just one of those things we have to learn how to deal with. I will offer another out of the blue assessment. Because fentanyl is so strong, to import a kilo of heroin, you only need to import 50 grams of fentanyl. It's a lot easier to hide 50 grams. So then you ask yourself, back to my obnoxious example of, are you really helping with these draconian rules and pretense of interdiction? I think education and experience are what we should strive at, and I'm not sure what more can you do about education. I noticed a lot of young people are now doing tobacco via vaping. I don't know how you cope with that kind of logic. Anyhow, that's sort of my thoughts on it.
Well, I'm really happy. I'm very happy to see the people that will work on prevention, because I think prevention is going to have to be part of what we look at. It certainly can't hurt. And I do believe that there will be a population that will always use drugs and will die, but we want them to be well educated before they do. Okay, that's how I feel about it. And if they choose to be stupid, and that's basically what kids are, then they will at least be knowledgeable.
Which I think is a perfect segue into our next one. I would like to thank Dr. and Shannon for coming and giving us this presentation. That's very good information.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chairman Lane,
So,
I think
oh, sorry. Wait.
Sorry, real quick. First off, I just pointing out to prevention, I wanted to thank Dr. Krieger for the ACEs and trauma. I think that's a really good point. But also, I just had a question. If we were to look at hospitalization, morbidity around drug use and not the mortality by itself, would it reflect the same trends in data? Do we know? Or is there something we're missing by just looking at deaths?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would love to be able to look at our hospitalization data. The problem is so about 1 out of every 6 people in Cowlitz County that's hospitalized is an organ facility, and my access to organ data is really limited to the extent that I essentially just don't have it. So I haven't really looked at our hospitalization data because we're missing a piece of it. But I would be surprised if the trends looked much different than what the death data show. And that's the same for the ED, the emergency department visit data as well. We're missing Oregon. And so it's just, yeah, I wish I had more data to share, but that's a great question.
Thank you again. And my belief is that, yes, that there will always be people that are going to do it, and there will be deaths. And so the way to prevent that, instead of trying to stop people from doing drugs with the war on drugs, would be educate the people and prevent it from starting in the beginning. So we have our next presenters are from the ESD 112, the school coalitions. Please come up. And they're going to give us a presentation on what we're doing in our schools to try and help prevent the drug abuse from starting in the beginning.
before we go down, Mr. Chairman, you said something that I don't understand. We've been trying to do prevention forever. And so you've got a handle on some new form of prevention that will.
Not so much. I think we've been trying to fight the war on drugs, but if I remember correctly, when we asked about prevention and what our HHS budget was, that this was, I asked about a year ago of what we have towards prevention of the youth, it was 0. So these people are doing something in the schools now that hopefully is helping. But yeah, I don't think we'll ever win overall. So please, I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
Good morning. I'm Joy Lyons from ESD 112.
Thank you.
And I sent my presentation ahead of time, so I'm hoping that someone else can go through the slides. Do you have that? Or I sent it to Jenna. I also have it on a jump drive if you need it.
Would you give us a minute on that?
Sure.
And part of the challenges I think we
There you go.
have in prevention is back in the day, we didn't have as much idle time. And the idle time's a big danger. I know there are some kids programs that seem to help by keeping them occupied and with a goal in mind.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm very honored to be here, and I'll introduce myself again. I'm Joy Lyons from ESD 112, and I serve as our Assistant Director for Prevention Programs. I've been with the ESD for a little over 12 years, doing this amazing work of prevention. And I'm joined by 3 of our Cowlitz County Coalition coordinators who are all here, and hopefully if we have time to answer questions, they can speak to what they're doing specifically in their communities. So I'd like to—
Joy,
yes.
just before you get started, we're always sensitive about people not knowing what acronyms mean. I know it's Educational Service District, but what does that cover?
Yes, thank you for asking. Educational Service District is our regional district in the state of Washington for the 6-county region of Cowlitz County, Pacific County, and then going up Clark, Skamania, Klickitat, and Wahkiakum. Sorry, I forgot that one. So we serve 6 counties, and there are 9 ESDs in the state of Washington. And our mission is really to support our schools in our region to equalize educational opportunities and create innovative partnerships and services. And we do all sorts of things at ESD 112.
Joy, could I ask one more question? Could you introduce the 3 ladies? Because
Yes.
there might be people in the audience that might want to contact either one of them.
Yes, and I do have a slide at the end that has everybody's contact information, but we have Wen Trong from Epic Coalition in Longview, and we have Betsy Burnt from Highlander Hope in Kelso, and Lindsay Lawner from Castle Rock Care in Castle Rock. So those are our 3 very seasoned, amazing coalition coordinators. And I have the honor of presenting today because I represent all of the work that we do. So I'm going to look at it from a broader lens first and then share a little bit of details. So click, please, next slide. So I'd like to begin with a story that is frequently told about prevention, and it illustrates really what prevention is. Susan and Fernando are fishing on the side of a river when they see a man floating in the water. He is struggling to stay afloat. And so Fernando drops his fishing pole and pulls the man out of the water. The man is sputtering and cold, and Susan calls an ambulance. Susan and Fernando go back to their fishing, and then pretty soon they see a woman in the water, and she is also cold and needing help. She's struggling, and Fernando goes in and helps the woman. Susan calls another ambulance, and they take her to the hospital. The friends return to fishing, and next thing you know, you see a whole group of people in the world of youth prevention, maybe they're youth, who are struggling to stay afloat. And Fernando drops his fishing pole and starts to haul all the youth out of the water. And he looks up to Susan, and she starts walking away. And he says, "What are you doing? We need to help these children." And she says, "I'm going up the river to figure out why they're all falling into the river." And that's the metaphor of prevention. In our prevention services and what we do, we go up river, you'll hear that term, to find out What is contributing to the people and the youth who start to abuse substances in the beginning? In this analogy, we want to know exactly what is causing our youth to fall in the river. And perhaps Susan will go upstream and she'll find a fence that was built, but it's fallen down, or she's finding a slippery slope where there needs to be some vegetation built that would prevent the youth from falling in the river. In our prevention work, we want to find out what's causing it. And I heard our doctor and all of you use this common language. And we work to reduce the risks and we build the protection for our young people to prevent them from using in the beginning. So once our young people have developed the problems associated with substance abuse, meaning have they started using, they really are more likely candidates for treatment. And that is not what I'm here to talk about today. My whole vision and mission is about prevention. So next slide. When it comes to youth prevention, there is really no one size fits all approach. There's no magic answers. I wish I had them. I would put myself out of a job, which I'd gladly take. But what works in Longview may not work in Kelso, and it also may not work in Castle Rock. While we utilize a community-driven approach, we must also use evidence-based approaches to ensure that our goals are met and that we do no harm. So my plan for today is I am going to take a minute to speak about what is prevention, what is our ESD approach, and why is it important? What does the data say about youth substance use and mental health in Cowlitz County? And I will share just a very, very high level of some of our healthy youth survey data. And then what prevention strategies are the ESD implementing in Cowlitz County? Next slide, please. So children and teens who misuse substances are at higher risk than adults for developing short and long-term physical consequences. This is because their brains are still developing and they are more sensitive than adults to the effects of drug use. Children and teens who use alcohol and marijuana are more likely to develop addiction, be seriously or fatally injured, fail in school, engage in risky sexual behavior, and have depressive feelings or thoughts of suicide. Next slide. Our prevention work is grounded in Hawkins and Catalana research out of the University of Washington, risk and protective factors theory. The theory draws upon the connections between the risk and the protective factors that influence individual behaviors. And the more protective factors a young person has, the higher chance they have of preventing the negative behaviors such as drug use. Primary prevention is a public health strategy, and it aims to prevent the problems from occurring before they happen. And it also can be done at a population level by addressing the root causes. I think we can all agree that as adults and community members, we want to do anything and everything we can do to ensure that our young people grow up to have healthy, strong futures. In substance use primary prevention, we seek to understand those root causes. We also provide population level strategies such as messaging, education, and we address social norms. Next slide. There is strong evidence that education alone, such as standalone assemblies or events, will not prevent young people from using substances. To use the analogy of the river, we must identify the resources and the strategies to prevent young people from falling into the river. Educating the people about safe swimming or banning swimming isn't enough. In some communities, we need to provide life vests or signage about risks or teaching the skills that young people need to swim. So using that same analogy, teaching skills, that's what works in prevention. Each and every community has its own set of unique characteristics or risk and protective factors. Next slide. At ESD 112, we receive funding from the Washington State Healthcare Authority to implement prevention strategies throughout our region, and it's called the Community Prevention Wellness Initiative. There are over 100 CPWI communities throughout our state, as represented on the left-hand, I know it's small, but it's a map. And there are 3 identified in Cowlitz County: Longview, Kelso, and Castle Rock. Click, please. So CPWI, Community Prevention Wellness Initiative, is a 2-pronged approach. We approach prevention at the school and the community level. Data is used to identify and fund the highest need areas. Now, there's always need for prevention everywhere, and I always have a vision of having prevention in every school, and we don't have that, unfortunately, with the services that ESD is providing. The funding supports the evidence-based community decision-making model for addressing local need and implementing effective culturally appropriate services, as well as the school-based aspect of implementing the prevention as well as intervention for our students. So before I provide additional details about what our coalitions and schools are doing, I would like to take a few minutes to do the high-level snapshot of our data. Next slide. So Healthy Youth Survey is administered in all Cowlitz County schools every 2 years in the 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grades. The Healthy Youth Survey invites youth in Washington to share about their well-being, behaviors, attitudes, community and school experiences, and more. In 2023, the survey was the 18th statewide survey of Washington students and the 11th iteration of the HYS, Healthy Youth Survey. Participation has been steadily increasing over time, and in 2023, over 215,000 students from all 39 counties participated in the HYS. In October of 2023, there were 3,067 Cowlitz County youth who completed the Healthy Youth Survey questionnaire during their school day. Next slide. In Cowlitz County, I'm going to share just a snapshot of the data. I didn't put together graphs, and I'm not an epidemiologist, so I will just say we do use the data and we analyze it. This is representing our 10th graders in Cowlitz County, and being mindful that there were 868 youth who responded to the survey, and that represents 66% of the 10th grade population in Cowlitz County. So 11% reported that they had no or very low hope. 15.6% of our 10th graders say they had no adults to turn to. 52.2% were unable to stop or control worrying. 35.1% reported depressive feelings. 19.4% reported that they were contemplating suicide in the last year. 19.1% reported they had a plan to attempt suicide. 9.5% attempted suicide in the last month. These numbers are so unsettling and speak to the work that we have to do in our communities. Remember, the numbers reflect 66% of 10th grade student body and only those who took the survey. And additional data can be found publicly on the askhys.net website. Next slide, then, and the last slide of data that I'll share is about substance use. Again, the same population of students, 10th grade, 11.2% reported that they were currently using alcohol, and that's within a 30-day period. 42.9% reported that they had ever tried alcohol. 5.9% reported that they were participating in binge drinking, which is using drinking 5 or more at once. 10.3% reported current marijuana use. 21.3% were reported lifetime marijuana use that they'd ever used. marijuana in their lives, and 12.6 reported current e-cigarette vape use, which was a bit surprising to us. So next slide, please. Overall, the healthy use, this is good news around substance use. I want to point out there is a downward trend from 2010 to 2018. Consistently across the county and the state, substance use rates are going down among our youth. You can see a break in this trend. It was in 2020. We all know what happened then. And then we are seeing interesting data from 2021 and 2023, a big reduction in substance use. And we're watching it carefully to learn what does that really mean, but it's really 50% reduction from the from 2018. And we are just watching the data to learn more. However, we still know there's work to do. We use the Healthy Use Survey to identify needs, write grants, plan and evaluate our primary prevention strategies. And one thing I really want to be clear is that without the HYS Healthy Use Survey, we wouldn't receive any of the funding that we receive. It is critical to the grant writing and also the evaluation process of our work. All right, next slide. So as I shared earlier, the ESD 112 implements a two-pronged approach to prevention. And our first prong is our school-based program. And we currently have 5 different school-based staff that are assigned to different schools in our region or in our county. It's only 5. I mean, I didn't look to see exactly how many middle schools and high schools we have throughout the whole county, but I know it's way more than that. So these are the names, and these are our 5 school-based professionals, and their contact information is also at the back of my presentation. So next slide. In the Student Assistance Program, you'll also hear it being referred to as the Prevention Intervention Services Program, lots of acronyms. The program is designed to reduce student risk for alcohol, tobacco, and other substance abuse, strengthen healthy attitudes, positive decision-making, skills, and provide standards of behavior, provide referrals and support services for students and families, provide education for parents, schools, and community about the ways to support the social emotional health of our youth, and assist students to achieve academic and social success. Then the next slide, the program includes additional details. We do provide ATOD, which stands for alcohol, tobacco, other drug education classes for students, classroom presentations, education, consultation for parents and staff, youth empowerment activities, cross-age education, youth-led activities, social skills, educational groups, referrals to community services. It's a very important part of the program is to be connected in the community and understand what treatment is available, what other options are there for young people, case management within the school team, and informational workshops. So the school-based staff work within the school to implement all these programs. And I do want to point out that they're trained to utilize evidence-based practices that focus on developing all the skills that I talked about. They're also trained about the counterproductive strategies that don't work to prevent youth from using substances, like the Just Say No campaign or the This Is Your Brain on Drugs. In our hearts, we felt that these strategies were effective because they were simple and direct. In reality, research shows that they were not effective to prevent youth substance use. And in fact, much research shows that they can do harm. All right, next slide. Oh, sorry, this is the slide I'm on. So I did want to take, because we have been implementing this program in our schools for over 12 years, and we have really good outcomes and data to show that it works, and young people are thriving based on the services they're receiving. So in our data highlights, and the source is our database that we capture our services. We provided, 381 students were served in skill building groups, and this is Cowlitz County. 1168 students participated in prevention education classes, which typically happen in the 9th grade or the sixth grade if they're in middle. 9,442 students participated in student awareness events, lots of examples. Our coalitions are a lot of times a part of that as well. And 139 students participated in newcomers groups, which is one of my favorite prevention strategies because it is a welcoming opportunity to help young people belong in their schools. And it's an outreach strategy that really identifies new students in schools and provides them with just a little bit of extra support and welcoming. And we know that's a protective factor, which is school belonging. All right, next slide. I think it's the last one in terms of data. I think you went backwards. Then the last data highlight on our program is we measure behavior and perception change from the beginning of the program to the end. And these are the outcomes we're seeing. So we measure children's hope, and that is based on science of hope. There's a lot of research around the agency that can be young people have when they are able to have problem solving and see a hope for their future. And of the students enrolled in Cowlitz County schools, their hope scale was increased by 17% from the beginning to the end of programming, which I think is huge. Substance use decreased across the board. For those that did use, we typically really try to serve students who aren't using. It's really a prevention program. However, we do have some groups that are provided for intervention and students who need some support because of use. Perception of harm increased, which we want to see. So that's a good thing. We want young people to see that using substance is harmful for them, their brains, and there's a big, that's a problem in our community. It's just seen as no big deal. There's a lot of perceptions around, any kind of substance use, especially the highest used, tobacco, marijuana, and alcohol. No big deal, it's legal, but it's a big deal for young people. 92.6% of the students, I'm so proud of this. 92.6% of our students said at the end of the program that it was either somewhat or very important to them. And 94.7% said they were glad they participated. And it's a voluntary program that we do not make them participate, but it's that the numbers show that it's effective and that they're getting things out of it. All right. Moving along, that's the school-based work. Can you, next slide, please. I am gonna move into what our community coalitions are doing and learning a bit more about the second prong of our CPWI, Community Prevention Wellness Initiative, which is our coalitions. The coalitions are comprised of community members and organizations working together towards the common goal of building safe, healthy, and drug-free community. It takes the whole community to do that. We know it's not on one entity to really have effective prevention in our communities. It's not on parents, it's not on schools, it's not on government, it's not on healthcare. We need everybody to make this work happen. So those were our 3 coalitions. And next slide, please. The model recognizes that local problems require local solutions. Therefore, employing a variety of evidence-based approaches that are locally developed. The coalitions recruit and engage multiple sectors within a community, as you can see around the circle, all different types of people. And the members are trained to understand the best practices of prevention to ensure evidence-based practices are being used. Next slide. The first coalition I'll highlight is our longest standing coalition that just celebrated its 21st year, Castle Rock Care Coalition. And Castle Rock Care has successfully implemented the evidence-based program Life Skills in the middle school, which is a unique role. I think it's because they've been there so long, they have such strong relationships and partnerships in the community. And Lindsay works in the school. So in addition to the school-based staff, she's also there doing amazing work with our young people. The coalition assists in planning and implementing the college and career fair for the community each year. They host the Cowlitz County Youth Leadership and Prevention Summit in partnership with our other two coalitions, as well as several community partners and volunteers. And Castle Rock Care Coalition leader is Lindsay Launer. So this, and I think I have one more slide actually that just shows some photos and different activities that Castle Rock has done over the last year. Really amazing examples of success and engagement and young people, and really being involved, which we know that's another protective factor, which is social opportunities for pro-social in activities. All right. Next slide is the second coalition that I'd like to highlight, which is EPIC. And EPIC stands for Empowering People Impacting Community. And EPIC mobilizes community members and resources to support youth and families. They are a 501c3 with multiple funding streams, always could use more, but they, in addition to their Washington Healthcare Authority grant. The recent successes of EPIC include the Mental Health and Fentanyl Awareness Middle School poster contest, as well as facilitating access for students to attend youth leadership and prevention conferences. The next slide, please. The Empower Up Youth Assistance Fund is one of the activities that EPIC is involved in, and I think it's actually, well, I'll take a minute and just kind of look at these photos. There's right in the middle is Jody Fowler, one of our student assistance professionals working at Monticello Middle School, doing amazing work there. And all sorts of different activities happening. The one on the bottom is a basketball team, and then as you see above it, it says most Mustangs choose not to vape, drink alcohol, or do drugs. And that is an example of an evidence-based program, which is positive social norms, focusing on really and teaching our young people and using messaging to show that really not all young people use, and it's important to show the real data that, and because we know that young people like to do what their peers do. So then we're focusing on the positive versus placing all the emphasis on the negative of, you know, here's all the scary stuff around drugs and you need to see this and that, and scaring kids really doesn't work. It in fact can backfire, and young people who are really at risk or want to be high risk takers end up wanting to try it. So that's why we have to be really careful around our education campaigns, and using our techniques need to be evidence-based so that we're not teaching young people how to use. So the positive social norms campaigns are effective, and I think a lot of I know a lot of our coalitions are engaged in that type of strategy. Okay, so the last slide does talk about the Empower Up Youth Assistance Fund. If you could click to the next. The mission is to promote positive changes for youth, and it begins with removing barriers for ensuring basic needs are met. Whether it's a new pair of shoes, covering a sports registration fee, or ordering a cap and gown for a senior graduation, EPIC's Empower Up program is dedicated to providing immediate and confidential assistance for our community's most vulnerable, which is youth. Investing in youth today allows them success tomorrow, says the EPIC chair, Tim Farrell. So the third and last coalition is on our next slide, is Highlander Hope. And they are our newest coalition, formed in 2021. So thankful that the Washington Healthcare Authority expanded and grew and offered additional funding. We've been asking for funding in Kelso for years and finally received it. Highlander Hope provides 2 different parent education opportunities implements bi-yearly drug take-back events to address the supply of drugs and reduce prescription painkillers out in the community. They implement community awareness activities such as town halls, and they participate also in the Youth Regional Leadership Prevention Summit. ESD 112 and Highlander Hope Coalition have a very strong partnership with Kelso Public Schools, and we will continue to build capacity within that catchment area. Highlander Hope lead is Betsy Burt. So next slide, I think it shows some wonderful pictures of Highlander Hope and the work they're doing. Again, I love the acronym of HOPE, and you'll see some of the great activities that are happening out in Kelso. So next slide, in conclusion, I would like to thank you for inviting me to be here today, in your interest in prevention, and the work that ESD is doing throughout our county. And I really do want to acknowledge that there are so many individuals and organizations out there doing amazing work with young people. And by all means, are we not the only people doing prevention? This is what we happen to have within our programs and the funding that we have. We're always looking to grow, always looking to build sustainable programs. So there are many opportunities to become involved. My call to action to those of you, Board of Health policymakers, as well as members of the public, would be if something sparks your interest, please reach out. Our work is based on civic engagement and community support. Keeping kids safe and drug-free requires our entire community, from individual strategies to community level and policy changes. If you'd like to learn more about what you can do to show support, please reach out. These are all our numbers, all our names. And I just thank you for your attention and inviting me to be here. Thank you so much. The last slide, I think, has my contact info. So there's me, that's my email address and my phone number. And just thank you so much for your attention. And I think we have time for questions. I didn't keep track of my time, so.
Thank you
we're
very
good.
much for coming and giving us this presentation. We've been waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, let's go ahead and open it up to public comment.
Hi, Joy. Thank you for answering my questions. I think that presentation you gave was outstandingly positive, and I appreciate that. Excuse me, I'm not contagious at all, excuse me. But I'm a pretty basic person, and I have been going to the school board's meetings. I have been going to different school functions. I've been talking to our past superintendent, and I have some very, very disturbing questions. One, apparently the phones are allowed in the classrooms, and he said, oh yeah, we have a whack that they're allowed. No, they are not. They can be taken and put in front of the school room so the kid cannot touch that. And what I'm trying to tell you is that this presentation was awesome. And it was, you know, it unfortunately didn't bring in the family issue as much as I wished it would. However, we have to have control as well. You can teach somebody, this is very bad. This chocolate brownie will make you fat. And as you can see, I have not listened to that. Okay. And the kids are not going to either. I mean, to a certain degree, what you've helped are the kids that have listened. And I think that's fantastic. I'm trying to help the kids that have a hard time listening. I believe that the phones need to be taken out of the school totally. If the parent needs to get in touch with a child, they can do so through the administration very, very easily, very easily. But we're not fighting that, are we? No. And also, apparently, from what Mr. Green told me, if a child is dealing and they question about it, they're going to discipline that child. He can demand a lawyer, and their phone number is presented to him so he can call that person, that lawyer, and get out of whatever situation he's in. Now, these are the things, these are the hardcore things that need to be addressed. I love the fuzzy things. I think it's great. I mean, I took psych also. in college. I know what you're doing and it's wonderful, but we need to go on the other end of the spectrum and say, okay, these are the kids are most swayed, easily swayed, and they can have it so easily. Here's my phone. Here's the phone number. Here's the app you can go to for whatever drug you want. And they share these apps and it's bam, bam, bam. They've got it in school. You take that phone away, at least part of the day, they're not going to be ordering drugs. What can you do about it?
I'm hearing everything you're saying. I'm hearing the need to have supports in place with discipline and having strong rules in schools. That's what I'm hearing. And I would say, I heard you say you've gone to school boards, you've talked to superintendents.
Yeah,
That would be
numerous times.
Absolutely. So I think I didn't share that ESD really does not have, we're not over any school districts.
No, but you have influence with those schools. The schools have to listen to you, and you know that. And if you tell them, we're going to be against that whack, we're going to take and make sure that you can take those phones away, not totally, they can be in front of the classroom or not allowed on the school premises. Right. That part I know other schools have done. They have not allowed any phone on the school premises. And if you need those schools, I can look them up again and I'll get back to you. I'll get your information. Because that has been done.
I'd love to learn what's working, what isn't.
Well, yeah, like I said, what you're doing is absolutely great, but we also need to have control, because if you can take a little bit of, get that child away from the temptation, he might understand what you're saying faster, better, quicker, before he gets lured in to that first time use.
Right. Thank you for asking. We're always learning and growing in our work, and the work of leading schools is certainly not easy. And there's so many whacks, as you say,
but that's your job,
are
though, is to
given.
go through those whacks and protest those whacks for us. That's your job, right?
So
Pretty
not
much.
Me personally. No,
Okay.
actually, as my role at the ESD is
111 or 112. That's what they're there, to protect our schools, our local schools. And that's why it's a local district.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is, when I shared about local problems required local solutions and really our
Correct.
model to value local voice, that is really about the funding that we receive through the Community Prevention Wellness Initiative and our parameters around how we're inclusive in civic engagement, and really it's more about our funding versus like ESD. So ESD doesn't tell me that I have to go do that with this funding. We follow our funders' guidelines.
So ESD basically means you're all about the funding. Yeah, I want something that will tell us and help our schools say, I'm standing up for what the locals want done. They want discipline in their schools.
Right.
And I'm going to stand up for that. And I'm not hearing that, correct?
So I'm not quite sure what I can say that would help you. I mean, I would be happy to have a conversation with you outside of probably this meeting, but
well, I'd love to have you say, Flo, what I can do is get a hold and find out if we can take the phones away, and then go to my particular district or school district, which is Castle Rock, and say, our new superintendent is Chris, help me. Right, Rickard. Anyways, and tell Chris that, you know what? We now can do that. I can help you have more control with your students by taking the phones away. That's what I'd love to have you do.
So I think I would listen, and I can't promise that I could do that here. It also is a bit outside my scope. One of my challenges in this role with ESD for 12 years is I don't tell schools what to do. We partner with our schools, and in reality, they have control over their own school. I'm not I'm not a governing body. When I say I,
So-
CSD is not.
Okay, I
Can-
agree, then you're not governing, but however, can you also tell them that, yes, I will help you circumvent that particular whack or try to get that down? Can you do that?
Your question is, are we able to go to a school district and say, hey, this is what the community is asking. Can we provide some support and help to you in making that happen?
Yes, yes.
I think that's a reasonable request. I can't promise that I
That's
can do it,
wonderful.
but what I'm hearing is that you would love to see the phones out of school, which I think I'm aware of a few schools in our region that have done that. So sometimes that's where we start is where might this be working? And we could take a look, we could have a conversation, we could look at the benefits and that might be a place to start.
Well,
Okay.
can I say something? So I think it's a greater public health issue that Dr. Krager would even be interested in looking at how phones affect the mental health of all of us. And so it's a bigger than just a school thing. It's all of us. And I like the point that you're bringing out that there's a lot of drug deals that are being done by phones, I'm sure. that's, I would think that's common
It's-
sense. But I think it's a general public health issue that goes way beyond this poor
Well,
woman,
I
Joy.
agree with you, but it has such an impact with our schools. But thank you very much. I
Yeah,
appreciate your
It was a
answers.
good point, Flo. Somebody has to say it.
Thank you for that comment.
Hi. I just had a question about the school program that you talked about. You said it'd been, I took a couple notes here, in the schools for a number of years. Did you say like 12 years or something?
So the Community Prevention Wellness Initiative has been implemented in our communities for 12 years. Prior to that, ESD actually did have a different grant that was implemented in Cowlitz County. It was through Safe Schools, Healthy Students. This was a long time ago. So there were prevention intervention specialists in many of our schools under a different funding source and under different guidelines.
Okay, but you said locally it was, what you presented today was only in 5 schools?
Correct.
So what are the numbers of the kids that are using, that have gone through the program in one of those 5 schools versus a school that doesn't have those programs? What's the comparison there? What impact is it making?
That's a great question. So you're wondering about the percentage of are you asking about like the substance use?
Yeah, you talked about like tobacco and
Right.
the drugs and alcohol and all of
So that is an evaluation question that I would defer to our evaluators to like compare the schools that don't have the program versus those that do.
that. Right.
And our program has been evaluated and there are reports that show reductions in substances for those that have, looking at health use survey. So that's the metric that we use for those that have the program. There's other more interesting, the data is more about like the protective factors around school connection, like bonding. So those that have a student assistance professional can have, in the health use survey, there's a whole section on protective factors. So they'll ask students questions like, do you have someone you can go to, an adult in your school?
Sure.
So we're seeing higher rates in those that, and obviously that makes sense. There's more support in the school. There's more adults that they could potentially talk to.
So you don't have, so maybe, let me make sure I'm interpreting this right. The goal of the program is to decrease substance use, right? Like that's the kind of the overarching
Yes.
goal. So, but did you say there is data? I didn't quite follow your answer. I
Yes.
think there is data comparing schools that didn't have
Yes.
this program to schools that did have this program. And you could just compare we have 10% that used when they did have it, but we have 20% that used that didn't have it. Therefore, it's an effective program. Am I making sense? The
Yes,
question I'm trying to ask.
I think what I hear you asking is you want to know, is the outcomes being compared to those that don't have the program
Right,
to
yeah.
show that it's effective?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
In terms of like school-specific data really belongs to the school, and I don't have that. So all the data I shared today is more countywide. But we could definitely, do an analysis if we want to look at our county here, I'm speaking Cowlitz, and looking at the schools. And I mean, really the goal is to increase the support and the education and have the resources available
Yeah.
for students.
Right. You'd want the resources if the resources were making an impact, I guess is my
Yes.
point. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
so how do you pull out the schools that didn't have that versus looking at the county?
Oh, yeah.
Pull out the schools that didn't have the program, looking at the schools that did have the program and comparing those numbers is what I guess is what
Mhm.
I'm asking, if that
Mhm.
data is out there somewhere.
Yeah, it is. It's, I don't have it on my finger and I don't have it handy, but I do know that our funders have a whole position dedicated to evaluation, and that is their expertise. So
Okay.
they'll for you.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Can they put back up your contact?
You
info
can,
And I'll take
absolutely.
a picture.
You
of
can
it.
email me and I can get that for you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
If you could send it to the board, to the clerk too, that would be nice,
Sure.
please.
Thank you for your presentation. I really feel that this is a great meeting, by the way. I applaud your efforts in what you're doing and the long-term effects of what you're trying to prevent. I feel leach into every aspect of our society, and we have to end up dealing with those problems later on because we didn't do a very good job of the preventative part of it that you're doing now. So I applaud your efforts. You're not in a lot of schools in our county. Why is that? Is there an effort being made to get into more schools? Or are we just focusing on the ones that you're in currently? Or what's the reasoning for not being in more schools?
It's a great question. We are told by the Washington Healthcare Authority where we can put these programs. We don't have, it's the Community Prevention Wellness Initiative. They select the schools and give us the high, they give us a choice and say, here's the community that's eligible for these for the funding. So that's the reason we don't have more within the Healthcare Authority funding. So as I shared, there's over 100 in the state. There's just not enough funding. So from that source, that's the reason. If there were other funding available, we've had schools in the past that funded their own. Like they had the money in their budgets to fund their own prevention intervention specialists or student assistance professionals. Those two titles are used interchangeably. And we're seeing a lack of funding for this particular role. So one of the asks would be, to the policy makers, go to the school boards and ask them if they have the money to fund these programs, and we're happy to help. We do have in our region, we do have some whose districts have funded their own. So we already know how to do that.
Okay, so is your reason for coming to the board today, are you asking for funding for more schools?
Great question. I wasn't told that. That wasn't my purpose. I was invited to come and speak about what we do. It wasn't my intention, but the more I learn about what's happening, it sounds like there might be money available, maybe. I don't know. So no, I was not here to ask for money.
So this is a question for the board then. What was the purpose of having her come and speak? Just an educational purpose, or what was the wanting to know what options are available?
Well, I wanted the public to know what the coalition is providing. And I wonder if it's based on the school's number of low-income students, diversity, equity, something where they're choosing schools based on some formula. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Definitely there's a
Yeah.
formula. So it's risk and protective factors, it's health use survey, it's multiple factors to determine where the funding will go.
And I also think that the Castle Rock Coalition, because it was ongoing and supported by the community,
Yeah.
that also got you into the program because that's been going on for a long time.
Does Lindsay want to talk? Do you want to talk about that, Lindsay? Or? You want to come up and talk about that?
Come get
Sorry, Mr.
There's an
Vader.
extra one right here.
Yeah,
Come here.
there you go.
At that point, we had absorbed the community of Vader. And because. Is this on?
Yep.
Because we had absorbed the community of Vader, our numbers within our healthy use survey for risk factors went up. And we actually, my understanding is back then beat out the community of Kelso by like 1/10 of a point for receiving the first CPWI in Cowlitz County. And so then we were able to continue the funding of our coalition as well as replace the student assistance professional at that time. And we've held the funding ever since.
The reason I asked that question is this topic has been brought up at multiple board meetings now in the last couple of months. So I think it's safe to assume that you guys are concerned with this issue and you're wanting to do something to work with the different coalitions that we have within the county. And that's great. I'm glad that you guys are doing that. One of the worst things that I feel that government can do is try to be everything for everybody and solve all the problems. And I don't think that that's government's role. But I do feel that the role that the Board of Health could play in this is working with institutions that specialize in what they do and building and correlating with them to come up with a program throughout the county that all the schools can benefit from, that all the children have access to, because it's not just a problem in Castle Rock, it's a problem in Kalama, it's a problem in Woodland, it's a problem in all these schools. And anything that we can do to help get programs like this into the schools throughout the county, I think is something that the majority of Cowlitz County citizens would be in favor of. This impacts everybody, whether you have children or not, because of the problems it creates within our society. So I applaud your efforts in that, and I would support, and I would like to speak with you afterwards also about your program and my program. But I think this is something that is well worth the time and energy that is being put into it. So thank you.
Well, I do want to, sorry. I do want to know though that it can be data driven based on if other schools already have other approaches that are working and you're showing that they're doing as well as you. I think it is important because I know our commissioner over there, Mr. Dahl, is interested in using tax monies carefully. And so if other schools are managing, they may have a better base of support taxes to provide the same kind of thing. It'd be good to know that so that we're not just pushing that on the other schools if they don't really need it. That would be my only concern of going countywide with all of it. But I think it's great. It's a great program. I've watched it. It's done wonders for the children I've been watching. I've sat in on some of the programs and I'm very impressed with the process. It's really, I'm really impressed. That's all I had to say.
Any
Thank
further
you.
comments or questions from the board? Well, I'd like to thank you again for your presentation, and yeah, this is something that I think it's, at least for me, very important, and we've been trying to get something off the ground, but well, finally the ball is rolling, at least in the fact that we're talking about it more.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for
Very
your
much
time. Thanks for
appreciated.
coming.
Yeah.
With that, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 11:47. Oh, are we done? Yes, sorry, there's 2 items on the agenda. Was to meet the regional health officer, and that's, we're gonna have to wait because we're still waiting for the regional health officer. And it was also, we'll talk about opioid settlement money at the next meeting. So the regional health officer, because there is no regional health officer right now, so that's why we're not going to meet them.
And I covered some of the opiate stuff in the BOCC a little earlier, so if they were in attendance, they.
Okay. Okay, so with that, then, thank you all for coming and attending, and it's nice to see the public commenting and helping the board, telling us what we want, what you want. We'll adjourn at 11:48. Thank you.
Okay.
Done?